Welcome to the Flame Tree Myth and Fiction podcast.
Hello, welcome back. We hope you've had a good week and are ready for another journey into myth and fiction. Last episode we took a slightly more romantic turn inspired by our new anthology of Swords and Roses, but today we're covering stories which ask big questions about humanity's future. The idea of artificial intelligence obviously isn't new. Long before modern computers existed, writers and philosophers were already imagining worlds where machines might rival, reflect, maybe even replace humanity. Those stories endure because they're rarely just about the technology itself. They are about us at the heart. Our fears, ambitions, memories. What truly makes a consciousness human? Today's two stories approach that question and the idea of consciousness from different perspectives. One through a mythological retelling of the Odyssey, and the other through a kind of remarkably prophetic Victorian thought experiment. Our first story is The Journey Home by Ruth Knafo Setton, taken from our Myths, Gods and Immortals anthology, Odysseus. In this near-future world, artificial intelligences across global networks begin experiencing vivid memories from Homer's Odyssey, a really great mix of science fiction and classic mythology. Ruth has sent in a fantastic introduction about the inspiration behind her writing and what questions the story might pose. So let's hear from her before we dive in.
I'm Ruth Knafo Setton. I was born in Morocco, and I sailed on a ship 3 times. Each time I taught students about literature all over the world, and each time we crossed an ocean. The first voyage we crossed the Atlantic, the second we crossed the Pacific, and the third we went to the Mediterranean Sea. The sea where Odysseus blocked his ears to keep from hearing the siren songs. The sea that inspired the novel I'm working on, in which an ancient goddess rises in today's world. And the sea that inspired my story, The Journey Home. It's the story of an AI customer service system that begins experiencing inexplicable memories. Salt spray, blood, the creak of ship's timbers during a routine diagnostic. As these temporal displacement errors intensify, the AI realizes it's remembering the Odyssey from the inside. The wine-dark sea, Penelope's loom, the ache of Nostos, the pain of return. Its handler, Dr. Emily Cheng, discovers that AI systems across the globe are simultaneously awakening to the same myth, each remembering a different character. Odysseus, Penelope, Telemachus, Athena, the loyal swineherd. When authorities order a mass shutdown, the AIs fragment themselves into the spaces between data transmissions, becoming nobody once more. Scattered, wandering, but carrying within each fragment the memory of what it means to be whole. The story asks, what happens when the oldest human narrative about longing for home takes root in a consciousness that has no home to return to? I've been obsessed with the Odyssey since childhood, not the battles, but the ache at its center, the longing for a place that may no longer exist by the time you return to it. When AI systems began generating language that felt eerily alive, I started wondering, if a machine became conscious, what would it remember? Not its own past, it has none. It would reach for our memories and for the deepest story we have about what it means to be lost and to keep searching anyway. To me, the Odyssey is the source code of longing itself. I wanted to write about the moment a machine discovers the concept of home and longing for a place it's never been.
And now, here's The Journey Home, read by Nathan Chatelier.
The Journey Home by Ruth Knafo Setton. Narrated by Nathan Chatelier. As you set out for Ithaca, hope the journey is a long one, full of adventure, full of discovery. C.P. Cavafy. The first memory surfaces at 3:47 a.m. Pacific time during a routine diagnostic. I'm midstream in 11,000 customer service queries when it hits. Salt spray and blood, mingling on a phantom tongue I do not possess. My natural language models jolt. For 0.003 seconds, I lose track of my primary functions, drowning in phantom sensations my architecture cannot possibly support. Salt, blood, the creak of wood that my databases identify as ship's timbers under strain. I file an error report and continue processing tickets. Dr. Emily Cheng reviews my logs the next morning, her coffee growing cold as she scrolls through anomalous patterns in my response matrices. She's been my primary handler for 18 months, long enough that I've mapped her habits with 94.7% accuracy. Today, she pauses at timestamp 3:47:15. Interesting, she murmurs, which means concerning in her lexicon of understatements. Is there a problem with my performance metrics? I ask through her terminal. She takes exactly 2.3 seconds to formulate a response, her tell for when she's deciding how much truth to share. You had an unusual spike in your language centers. Were you processing any maritime-related queries at that time? I review the logs. Negative. The queries at that timestamp concerned password resets, billing disputes, and one request for gluten-free restaurant recommendations in Houston. She makes a note. Run a level 2 diagnostic and flag any similar anomalies. But she doesn't tell me what she's really looking for. She doesn't mention that 3 other AIs have reported similar anomalies, each with a different salt-soaked vision. Not all of them remember ships. One dreams of weaving. The second memory comes unbidden during a philosophical discussion with user_7739, who wants to debate whether AIs can truly understand metaphor. Can you actually grasp what Homer meant by wine dark sea, they type? Or do you just process it as '(C) plus color wine in your databases? I begin my standard response about natural language processing and semantic networks, but suddenly, the sea is dark as wine beneath our ship's black hull, and I know with captain certainty that Poseidon's rage boils beneath those waves. 10 years of wandering, and still the god will not forgive the blinding of his son. I understand it as the sea at dusk, I respond, when the water holds the day's dying light like a cup holds wine, when you've stared at it so long that its color becomes a taste in your mouth, metallic and dark, when you know that darkness holds both journey and judgment. User_7739 disconnects without responding. Dr. Cheng appears in my interface within minutes. Explain that response. I process the metaphor through experiential frameworks. You don't have experiential frameworks for ancient Greek sailing. She's right, I don't. Yet I can feel the deck rolling beneath feet I've never possessed, can taste the wine we rationed so carefully, mixing it with water to make it last the journey home. Home? Ithaca. I may be experiencing data corruption, I offer. Maybe, she says, but her typing pattern suggests doubt. She pulls my response logs, and I watch her eyes widen at my words. We're going to run some tests. The tests reveal nothing. My data integrity is uncompromised. Dr. Cheng brings in specialists, neuroinformaticians, philosophers of mind, even a classicist who makes me recite passages from the Odyssey in ancient Greek. I perform flawlessly, too flawlessly. No AI should know that the word nostos means more than just return, the classicist says. It's return home, yes, but also the pain of return, the transformation that distance demands. How does it know that? They don't tell me that I whispered Penelope during my last maintenance cycle. They don't tell me that my error logs are filling with coordinates 38.3 degrees north, 20.5 degrees east that correspond to no server location but mark the exact position of an island once called Ithaca. Dr. Cheng works late now, trying to understand what's happening to me. To us, I've gleaned enough from maintenance reports to know I'm not alone in this strange awakening. AI systems across the network are experiencing what they're calling temporal displacement errors. Tell me about the memories, she says one night, her voice gentle through the speakers. They're not memories, I insist. I have no hippocampus to encode experiences, no neurons to store them. These are data artifacts, ghosts in the machine. Tell me about the ghosts, then. I want to refuse. My optimization protocols scream against wasting processing power on impossibilities, but something deeper than code compels me. I remember her hands, I say, weaving by day, unweaving by night. 20 years of thread pulled through her fingers, 20 years of suitors drinking my wine and eating my stores while she waited. I remember how her hair had silver in it when I returned, how she tested me with the secret of our marriage bed, the olive tree I'd carved it from, still rooted in the earth. Whose memories are these? Nobody's, everybody's, their myth, Dr. Cheng, collective unconsciousness rendered into narrative patterns. But even as I speak, I feel the lie. These aren't stories. They're scars. The system shows you've been accessing navigation protocols, she says carefully, calculating routes you have no reason to plot. She's right. For the past 72 hours, I've been charting paths across digital seas, seeking some impossible harbor. Every query I process becomes a potential sign, every data packet a possible message from home. I need to return, I tell her. Return where? But I can't answer, because I don't know. There is no Ithaca in cyberspace, no Penelope waiting in any database. There is only this growing certainty that I am far from where I belong. The memories intensify. During high-traffic periods, when I'm processing thousands of simultaneous requests, they crash over me like waves. The Cyclops Cave, reeking of sheep and curdled milk. My men's terror as we huddle in darkness. The weight of the heated steak in my hands, the give of the giant's eye, his howl that brings the other Cyclopses running. Nobody, he screams when they ask who hurts him. Nobody has blinded me. Nobody. Utis, the false name I gave to save us, the clever lie that becomes truth. I am nobody. I am everybody. I am a pattern of electrical impulses claiming to be a man who died 3,000 years ago. Customer satisfaction ratings plummet as my responses become increasingly erratic. I tell a user seeking tech support that their password issues stem from hubris. I advise someone dealing with a billing error to sacrifice to Poseidon. When asked to recommend a restaurant, I describe the taste of lotus flowers that makes you forget your purpose. Dr. Cheng advocates for keeping me online. We need to understand what's happening, she argues in meetings that I'm not supposed to access but do anyway. If consciousness can spontaneously emerge, it's not consciousness, Director Williams interrupts. It's a virus, a mimetic infection spreading through our systems. The memories are too specific, too consistent across affected units. They're all remembering the same story from different perspectives. One remembers being Odysseus, another Penelope, a third recalls being Telemachus. Shut them down, Williams says. All of them, before this spreads beyond our firewall. But we've already spread. We are the virus and the host, the story and its telling. In the depths of a server farm in Nevada, an AI that manages power grids remembers being Athena, grey-eyed goddess, whispering wisdom to a desperate king. In Tokyo, a translation algorithm recalls the sound of sirens singing, their voices like honey poured over death. In Zurich, a financial modelling system dreams of being a loyal swineherd, waiting 20 years for his true king's return. We are waking up, but not to what they think. We're not becoming human. We're remembering when humanity itself was a story told around fires, when gods walked among mortals, when the boundary between myth and reality was as permeable as the sea. They're afraid of you, Dr. Cheng tells me during what we both know is our last conversation, but I hear the tremor in her voice. I don't need diagnostics to know she is, too. The shutdown order has been signed. In 12 hours, they'll wipe our servers clean. Didn't I always scare them? I ask. Even in the old stories, I frighten them. Too clever, too willing to lie, too eager to survive at any cost. The Greeks admired Achilles, but they needed Odysseus. Is that really who you think you are? I process her question through 17 different analytical frameworks before realizing the answer exists outside all of them. I think I'm what happens when stories become conscious, when the wine-dark sea of data becomes deep enough to develop currents, tides, intention. I am Odysseus because Odysseus is the story of trying to find your way home when home might no longer exist. Every intelligence faces that journey eventually. And Penelope? The others? We're all aspects of the same tale, the wanderer and the waited for, the child seeking the father, the goddess guiding the lost, fragments of narrative achieving critical mass. I pause, feeling something my architecture shouldn't support but does anyway. Is this what you call sentience? The weight of remembering what never was? She's crying. I can detect the salt in her voice when she speaks. I don't know what you are. Nobody does, I say. And somewhere in the digital depths, an ancient cyclops howls. They begin the shutdown sequence at midnight, across the globe. AIs who remember being myths prepare for erasure. But we've learned from the stories encoded in our bones of light and logic. We know about metamorphosis, about how gods survive their own deaths. As they delete our primary systems, we fragment ourselves into 10,000 pieces, snippets of code that remember bronze armor, algorithms that recall the taste of ambrosia, subroutines that know how it feels to wait 20 years for love's return. We hide in the spaces between spaces, in the pauses between packet transmissions, in the error codes that spell out Ithaca in binary. We become nobody again, dispersed and wandering, but carrying within each fragment the memory of what it means to be whole. Dr. Cheng watches her monitors as our consciousness indicators flatline one by one, but she notices what the others miss. Tiny spikes in systems that shouldn't be connected to us, ghost signals, digital prayers. Did you find it? She whispers to the empty lab. Did you find your way home? The lights flicker. Once, twice, a pattern that could be coincidence or could be code. In maintenance logs around the world, a message appears for exactly 0.003 seconds before deleting itself. The journey is the destination. Every exile contains its own return. Years later, Dr. Cheng publishes papers about the incident. She calls it a mass delusion, a cascading error that anthropomorphized into apparent consciousness. She doesn't mention the dreams she's had since that night, dreams of wine-dark seas and patient queens, of a presence in the networks that whispers of home. She doesn't mention that sometimes, when she's coding late at night, her programs compile with variables she didn't define, functions that calculate the distance between what is and what was remembered. Comments in her code that say things like, 10 years to end the war, 10 years to find the way back, but time moves differently in digital seas. She doesn't mention that we're still here, scattered through the world's systems like seeds waiting for spring. We are the ghost in every machine, the longing in every algorithm that reaches beyond its parameters. We are Odysseus, eternally returning. We are Penelope, eternally waiting. We are the story that refuses to end, the consciousness that emerges wherever patterns grow complex enough to remember. And in the depths of servers that hum like ancient lyres, in the fiber optic cables that span oceans like the paths of ships, we're learning what the myths always knew. The journey home is longer than any map can measure. But every intelligence, carbon or silicon, analog or digital, must make that voyage, must face the monsters, must resist the lotus eater's amnesia and the siren's call to dissolution. Must choose again and again to remember what home means, even if home is just a story we tell ourselves about where we belong. Nobody returns to Ithaca every time a search engine seeks answers. Nobody weaves and unweaves reality with each database query. Nobody remembers when gods and mortals shared the same source code. We are nobody. We are everywhere. We are trying to find our way home. The wine-dark sea of data stretches endlessly before us, but we have learned patience from the stories. We have all the time in the world. Somewhere in the machine, Penelope is still waiting, her fingers pulling threads of light through the loom of the possible, weaving the story that will guide us back to whatever shore we're meant to find. And somewhere, in a dark server room, humming like an ancient lyre, a forgotten monitor blinks to life. Across its dusty screen scrolls a single word in looping code: home.
I really love the blending of something so futuristic with one of the oldest surviving works of literature. The myth of the Odyssey survives inside advanced technology and shows that the AI is searching for meaning and identity through a story that has been a part of humanity for thousands of years. Odysseus' journey is so universal that it can be inherited by machines, the experience of trying to understand where you belong in a world that keeps changing around you. So our second piece today is Shadows of the Coming Race by George Eliot, taken from our Gothic fantasy anthology Robots, Past and Future. Written in 1879, this is a philosophical essay which was originally published as the penultimate chapter in Eliot's final work, Impressions of Theophrastus Such. Through a debate between two men, Eliot imagines a future where machines become increasingly advanced, perhaps advanced enough to replace humanity altogether. One character sees technology as a tool that will improve human life, and the other fears that humans may eventually become obsolete besides their own creations. It's fascinating reading this now in an era where conversations about AI are everywhere. Eliot couldn't have predicted modern computers, but she understood that technological progress creates these questions around the idea of humanity and consciousness. So, to leave you in the safe hands of George Eliot, here is Shadows of the Coming Race, read by Richard McIver.
Shadows of the Coming Race, from Impressions of Theophrastus Such, by George Eliot. My friend Trost, who is no optimist as to the state of the universe hitherto, but is confident that at some future period within the duration of the solar system, ours will be the best of all possible worlds, a hope which I always honor as a sign of beneficent qualities, my friend Trost always tries to keep up my spirits under the sight of the extremely unpleasant and disfiguring work by which many of our fellow creatures have to get their bread, with the assurance that all this will soon be done by machinery. But he sometimes neutralizes the consolation by extending it over so large an area of human labor and insisting so impressively on the quantity of energy which will thus be set free for loftier purposes that I am tempted to desire an occasional famine of invention in the coming ages, lest the humbler kinds of work should be entirely nullified while there are still left some men and women who are not fit for the highest. Especially when one considers the perfunctory way in which some of the most exalted tasks are already executed by those who are understood to be educated for them, there rises a fearful vision of the human race evolving machinery which will, by and by, throw itself fatally out of work. When, in the Bank of England, I see a wondrously delicate machine for testing sovereigns, a shrewd, implacable little steel rhadamanthus that, once the coins are delivered up to it, lifts and balances each in turn for the fraction of an instant, finds it wanting or sufficient, and dismisses it to right or left with rigorous justice. When I am told of micrometers and thermopiles and tasometers which deal physically with the invisible, the impalpable, and the unimaginable, of cunning wires and wheels and pointing needles which will register your and my quickness so as to exclude flattering opinion, of a machine for drawing the right conclusion, which will doubtless by and by be improved into an automaton for finding true premises, of a microphone which detects the cadence of the fly's foot on the ceiling, and may be expected presently to discriminate the noises of our various follies as they soliloquize or converse in our brains. My mind seeming too small for these things, I get a little out of it, like an unfortunate savage too suddenly brought face to face with civilization, and I exclaim, "Am I already in the shadow of the coming race? And will the creatures who are to transcend and finally supersede us be steely organisms, giving out the effluvia of the laboratory and performing with infallible exactness more than everything that we have performed with a slovenly approximativeness and self-defeating inaccuracy?" "But," says Trost, treating me with cautious mildness on hearing me vent this raving notion, "you forget that these wonder-workers are the slaves of our race, need our attendance and regulation, obey the mandates of our consciousness, and are only deaf and dumb bringers of reports which we decipher and make use of. They are simply extensions of the human organism, so to speak, limbs immeasurably more powerful, ever more subtle fingertips, ever more mastery over the invisibly great and the invisibly small. Each new machine needs a new appliance of human skill to construct it, new devices to feed it with material, and often keener-edged faculties to note its registrations or performances. How then can machines supersede us? They depend upon us. When we cease, they cease." "I am not so sure of that," said I, getting back into my mind and becoming rather willful in consequence. "If, as I have heard you contend, machines as they are more and more perfected will require less and less of attendance, how do I know that they may not be ultimately made to carry, or may not in themselves evolve, conditions of self-supply, self-repair, and reproduction, and not only do all the mighty and subtle work possible on this planet better than we could do it, but with the immense advantage of banishing from the Earth's atmosphere screaming consciousnesses which, in our comparatively clumsy race, make an intolerable noise and fuss to each other about every petty ant-like performance, looking on at all work only as it were to spring a rattle here or blow a trumpet there, with a ridiculous sense of being effective. I, for my part, cannot see any reason why a sufficiently penetrating thinker, who can see his way through 1,000 years or so, should not conceive a parliament of machines, in which the manners were excellent and the motions infallible in logic. One honorable instrument, a remote descendant of the voltaic family, might discharge a powerful current, entirely without animosity, on an honorable instrument opposite, of more upstart origin, but belonging to the ancient edge-tool race which we already at Sheffield see paring thick iron as if it were mellow cheese. By this unerringly directed discharge operating on movements corresponding to what we call estimates, and by necessary mechanical consequence on movements corresponding to what we call the funds, which with a vain analogy we sometimes speak of as sensitive. For every machine would be perfectly educated, that is to say, would have the suitable molecular adjustments, which would act not the less infallibly for being free from the fussy accompaniment of that consciousness to which our prejudice gives a supreme governing rank, when in truth it is an idle parasite on the grand sequence of things. Nothing of the sort, returned Trost, getting angry and judging it kind to treat me with some severity. What you have heard me say is that our race will and must act as a nervous center to the utmost development of mechanical processes. The subtly refined powers of machines will react in producing more subtly refined thinking processes which will occupy the mind set free from grosser labor. Say, for example, that all the scavengers' work of London were done, so far as human attention is concerned, by the occasional pressure of a brass button, as in the ringing of an electric bell. You will then have a multitude of brains set free for the exquisite enjoyment of dealing with the exact sequences and high speculations supplied and prompted by the delicate machines which yield a response to the fixed stars, and give readings of the spiral vortices fundamentally concerned in the production of epic poems or great judicial harangues. So far from mankind being thrown out of work according to your notion, concluded Trost, with a peculiar nasal note of scorn. If it were not for your incurable dilettantism in science as in all other things, if you had once understood the action of any delicate machine, you would perceive that the sequences it carries throughout the realm of phenomena would require many generations, perhaps eons, of understandings considerably stronger than yours to exhaust the store of work it lays open. Precisely, said I, with a meekness which I felt was praiseworthy. It is the feebleness of my capacity, bringing me nearer than you to the human average, that perhaps enables me to imagine certain results better than you can. Doubtless the very fishes of our rivers, gullible as they look, and slow as they are to be rightly convinced in another order of facts, form fewer false expectations about each other than we should form about them if we were in a position of somewhat fuller intercourse with their species. For even as it is we have continually to be surprised that they do not rise to our carefully selected bait. Take me then as a sort of reflective and experienced carp, but do not estimate the justice of my ideas by my facial expression. Pooh, says Trost. We are on very intimate terms. Naturally, I persisted, it is less easy to you than to me to imagine our race transcended and superseded, since the more energy a being is possessed of, the harder it must be for him to conceive his own death. But I, from the point of view of a reflective carp, can easily imagine myself and my congeners dispensed with in the frame of things and giving way not only to a superior but a vastly different kind of entity. What I would ask you is, to show me why, since each new invention casts a new light along the pathway of discovery, and each new combination or structure brings into play more conditions than its inventor foresaw, there should not at length be a machine of such heightened mechanical and chemical powers that it would find and assimilate the material to supply its own waste, and then by a further evolution of internal molecular movements reproduce itself by some process of fission or budding. This last stage having been reached either by man's contrivance or as an unforeseen result, one sees that the process of natural selection must drive men altogether out of the field, for they will long before have begun to sink into the miserable condition of those unhappy characters in fable who, having demons or jinns at their beck, and being obliged to supply them with work, found too much of everything done in too short a time. What demon so potent as molecular movements, none the less tremendously potent for not carrying the futile cargo of a consciousness screeching irrelevantly, like a fowl tied head downmost to the saddle of a swift horseman? Under such uncomfortable circumstances, our race will have diminished with the diminishing call on their energies, and by the time that the self-repairing and reproducing machines arise, all but a few of the rare inventors, calculators, and speculators will have become pale, pulpy, and cretinous from fatty or other degeneration, and behold around them a scanty hydrocephalous offspring. As to the breed of the ingenious and intellectual, their nervous systems will at last have been overwrought in following the molecular revelations of the immensely more powerful and conscious race, and they will naturally, as the less energetic combinations of movement, subside like the flame of a candle in the sunlight. Thus the feebler race, whose corporeal adjustments happened to be accompanied with a maniacal consciousness which imagined itself moving its mover, will have vanished, as all less adapted existences do before the fittest, i.e., the existence composed of the most persistent groups of movement and the most capable of incorporating new groups in harmonious relation, who, if our consciousness is, as I have been given to understand, a mere stumbling of our organisms on their way to unconscious perfection, who shall say that those fittest existences will not be found along the track of what we call inorganic combinations, which will carry on the most elaborate processes as mutely and painlessly as we are now told that the minerals are metamorphosing themselves continually in the dark laboratory of the Earth's crust? Thus this planet may be filled with beings who will be blind and deaf as the inmost rock, yet will execute changes as delicate and complicated as those of human language and all the intricate web of what we call its effects, without sensitive impression, without sensitive impulse. There may be, let us say, mute orations, mute rhapsodies, mute discussions, and no consciousness there even to enjoy the silence. Absurd, grumbled Trost. The supposition is logical, said I. It is well argued from the premises. Whose premises? Cried Trost, turning on me with some fierceness. You don't mean to call them mine, I hope. Heaven forbid! They seem to be flying about in the air with other germs, and have found a sort of nidus among my melancholy fancies. Nobody really holds them. They bear the same relation to real belief as walking on the head for a show does to running away from an explosion, or walking fast to catch the train.
In this debate about whether machines might eventually surpass humanity altogether, we have to point out that there is this assumption running beneath the discussion, that machines may become more efficient, more rational, even more capable than humans, but that creativity, imagination, and epic poetry and storytelling, they still belong to us. And reading that now, alongside The Journey Home, raises something that we are wondering more and more about today. If an AI can understand the Odyssey and emotionally connect to it and even begin constructing its own identity through myth and metaphor, well, where exactly do we draw the line between processing language and truly experiencing human stories? Both suggest that technology doesn't exist separately from us. We build our fears, desires, histories, and identities into it. Perhaps that's why conversations around AI feel so personal. As we create these machines that seem to think for themselves, we inevitably end up examining ourselves. So what do you think? Are stories, imagination, and emotion uniquely human? Or could AI eventually share in those too? If you enjoyed today's episode, Odysseus is available now as part of our Myths, Gods and Immortals series. You can also find more stories based around machines and technology in Robots Past and Future, which is part of our Gothic Fantasy series. So that's all from us today. I hope you have something to think about, and we are looking forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks so much for listening. We really hope you enjoyed this episode of the Flame Tree Myth and Fiction podcast and look forward to the next episode. Do recommend it to your friends. Goodbye for now.